Testing 1 2 3 1 2 3.
Testing 1 2 3 1 2 3.
We're good on Twitch. And we're good on YouTube.
All right. You ready to get started?
Yep.
Hello and welcome to episode 247 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are discussing the fourth and final major of the Call of Duty League season, and it was incredible. It was controversial. It was unexpected. It was a lot of things. I don't know exactly how to process exactly what we saw this weekend, but that's what the show is for. We are going to break it all down, including a fourth different major champion this season. Not every year we get that, but we got it this year. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bank?
Yeah, doing all right. Pretty eventful weekend of Call of Duty, to say the least. I think for a majority of the tournament, the crowd lived up to the hype. Obviously, we'll dive into that a little bit more later on, but um, I started off strong, waking up at 8 a.m. for the first match on Friday, and then these last 2 days, I admittedly tried waking up earlier, and it just wasn't happening. So, um, it got to me a little bit, but outside of that, it was a very electric event, especially today, and especially the last few matches to close out the tournament, as is expected nowadays with the hierarchy of the CDL. So I'm ready to dive in.
I think it's fair to say that the Paris crowd and the atmosphere that would have been very much hyped up over the past few months heading into this event, that it lived up to the hype. The fans were nuts, very much seemed like starved for Call of Duty action. And it certainly helped that the Paris Gentlemates, their hometown team, did make quite a bit of a run in this tournament. But I think, we can't really talk about Paris. We can't talk about the Gentlemates. First of all, we have to discuss the winners of the fourth major of the season, and that is OpTic Texas. They did it much differently than they had done, made it through the first three major winners brackets. They had not lost a winners bracket match at On Land this season until yesterday, when they lost the winners finals to the Los Angeles Thieves. They end up losing that match to LAT 3-0. They go down the losers bracket. They beat the hometown aforementioned Paris Gentlemates in the losers finals. And then today, just about half an hour ago or so, maybe 45 minutes ago, they defeated the Los Angeles Thieves in a rematch of the Major 3 Grand Finals, of the Winners Finals, for, I think, both Major 3 and Major 4 and the Minor Grand Finals. They played a lot recently, but they were able to come back from a 3-2 deficit, win the final two maps of the Grand Final Series, and take their first major of the season. I wanted to start with OpTic. What was different, I guess, about this Grand Finals? We'd seen them completely dominate teams all the way through the winners bracket throughout this season. We saw them dominate teams online as well, but they always struggled in the grand finals. They've been close, of course. They lost in Game 7 to the LAT at Major 3. They were fairly close against Paris, not so close against FaZe, certainly in some of those maps, but not in the series overall. But what was different about today? What was different about OpTic beating LAT today to win their first major of the season?
Well, shout out Rickus Morty in the Twitch chat this time, not the YouTube chat. If you ask him, he's saying gridlock is the difference, and I think we'll build up to that, because obviously gridlock was the final map, is actually the final two maps, but obviously in a 7-game series, the map 7 is the most important one, and that was gridlock as well. But really, I mean, the biggest thing starting out from the very beginning of the grand finals is, we heard OpTic fans very vocally throughout this season complaining about the lack of a true advantage coming from the winners bracket and all that conversation we've had multiple times now. As a result of them losing to LAT in the winners finals, they got to experience the quote unquote losers bracket advantage of playing that match directly before the grand finals. And it definitely, like, they came out in 100 point club LAT map one of this series. And I was like, that was literally the first thing that went into my head was like, oh Jesus, this is literally exactly what OpTic fans have been complaining about for months, and now they're on the other end of it. But then LAT, made it a, a much more interesting series after that, as is
Mm-hmm.
expected, and um, they win the map two search. That is what it is. We've talked about OpTic search leading up to this tournament before. And then in the map three overload, OpTic was up 3-1 at the half, and LAT ended up winning 7-3. So
Mm-hmm.
that was I thought that was going to be a momentum swing. But then we go to the second hard point in the series, and OpTic win a banger, 250 to 243, that literally came down to the wire. So then I'm sitting here thinking, like, okay, OpTic's won both hard points in the series. Can they win an S&D? They lose the S&D in map 5, and I'm sitting here again thinking in the back of my head, okay, this is going to be another instance where OpTic lose the grand finals after winning both hard points, but they can't win the searches. And then, like Rickus Mortis said, those final two gridlocks at the end, the overload was a really hard fought map, 4-3, and then gridlock S&D 6-1 out of OpTic to close things out in the game 7. I mean, I was just absolutely stunned that they were able to, not only that they were able to win the S&D, but that they were able to win it so convincingly when, like, all the chips were on the table and everything in a do or die map at the end of this grand finals, especially after they had already lost two S&Ds in the series previously. So I think that's obviously the very summed up version of answering what was different this time around. That the simple answer is they didn't look great in search and destroy at points this weekend, but they looked phenomenal in the one S&D that mattered most, which was the S&D to win it all.
Yeah, I think we have to narrow down on those last two maps because this is basically inverse of what Major 3 was. OpTic went up 3-2 in the Major 3 Grand Finals against LAT. Of course, Dashy had that incredible quick scope in map, what would that be? Map 5,
Yeah.
to go up 3-2 and to be one map away from winning Major 3, and then LAT come back and they win Game 6, they win Game 7, and they win Major 3. Today it was the complete opposite. LAT cruised to another S&D win. They were 6-0 in S&D until Game 7 of this tournament. So they had won all 6 of their search and destroys until the final search and destroy of this tournament. And going into that overload after they win Din S&D 6-2, Shotzi has an abysmal map. He goes 2-7. They go into gridlock overload. And like you said, it was a really close map. OpTic, I think, went up 4-1, if I'm not mistaken, in this map. And then LAT just started chipping away at the lead, and Mercules kind of saved the day at the very, very end of this map and hold on for OpTic to force a Game 7. But even before that, LAT had won. They showed it on the screen that they had won. It said the last 5 overloads, but they had actually won 6 consecutive overload maps against OpTic heading into that gridlock overload. So, of course, like, they buck that trend and they're able to force a Game 7. And like I just said, LAT were 6-0 in search and destroy before this map as well, so they had to buck another trend. And obviously OpTic had struggled in particular in S&D against LAT in both the winners finals and the grand finals, and yet they were able to completely dominate. I think they went up 4-0. Then LAT won one round, and then that final round they wiped them off the map. I think it was a double nade that got a 2-piece to make it a 4v2, and Neum ends up being the last alive. And I mean, put him in a 1v4 against an OpTic team that is feeling very, very good. I just don't think that there's any hope for that, and obviously didn't work out, and OpTic wins this series and wins this tournament Looking at the other side of this, we're going to stay on the grand finals, of course. How much weight are you, just to kind of hone in on the winners bracket? How much of that do you believe is a major factor in the fact that not only did we get 4 different major champions this year, but all 4 of our major champions came from the losers bracket? Of course, OpTic was on the losing end of 3 of those and the winning end of today. But a 4-for-4 sweep for the losers bracket teams. And now we're getting, I would say, pretty dangerously close to 50-50. I don't remember what the exact percentage of it. It was like 54, 55%. Since they had pretty much eliminated the winners bracket advantage, that the losers bracket, or 55% that the winners bracket team would win the major. I would say that it's almost 50-50 now, certainly 100% this year, and we'll see how it goes at champs. How much of a factor do you actually believe it is versus the particular teams that ended up winning each of these 4 majors this season?
Yeah, I think that would it obviously, with it being 100% of winners coming from losers bracket now, I think it would be a easier conversation to have in terms of the actual impact if it wasn't 3 times that OpTic lost from winners. Obviously we can't control that or anything, but that would just give us a larger sample size. But it does, I mean, in a very small sample size or in a vacuum, like OpTic lose 3 grand finals from winners and they win the one from losers, and then obviously the other time the other teams all won from losers as well, like you said. So I mean, it can't be ignored. I think that's just the bottom line from this. Like Daniel Ty has had his comments and his stance on this winners bracket advantage or lack thereof for a while now, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that's like handled or communicated in the off season, at least in terms of what the format looks like for next year. I don't know. I just had a massive brain fart there, but obviously there's still the 2 biggest tournaments of the year. I think even if it only happens in one of these upcoming events where the losers bracket team wins, I think it's going to be something that just can't be ignored in the upcoming off season. It's going to have to be addressed. I don't know if it'll actually lead to anything changed or anything along those lines, but it's definitely got to make you think. And I think especially because the last 2 events and the way LAT were playing going into this finals, I really thought they were going to close this out and take care of business. So I'm not of the mindset that it's like 100% has a super big impact, but it clearly has to impact things to some degree. And it's going to be interesting to see if the league does make any changes to the format next year. But obviously, we still got a lot of meaningful COD to play under this current format this year.
Yeah, so LAT in this tournament, granted, they play Carolina round 1, and they do what they should do. I mean, it was one of the more dominant overloads that you would ever see in the CDL. But they go 3-0 against Carolina, and then they end up beating the Gentlemates they beat FaZe in round 2, and that goes to game 5. It goes to game 5, round 11. And then, of course, they beat OpTic 3-0. So 2 sweeps and a game 5 in there. Very dominant performance from LAT overall. The thing I struggle with the winners bracket advantage, or I guess just the purported effect that it has, or lack of effect that it has on the grand finals, is that we have seen in different cases the winners bracket teams starting the grand finals fairly well, and then they kind of fade, obviously, and then they lose. Then today, like you mentioned a little bit ago, it was a 100-point club in the first map of this grand final series. OpTic wins 250-95. And then LAT kind of picks it up and they go up 2-1, and then it's really back and forth from there. So I'm not exactly sure how to determine how much of an impact it has. I'm sure that it does have an impact for OpTic to play 3 consecutive matches, to play against LAT in the winners finals, then the Gentlemates in the losers finals, and then LAT again in the grand finals. They played 13 maps consecutively, where LAT obviously had a little bit of break between the winners finals and the grand finals. I don't know if it is as stark or like I kind of get it. I get why they're saying it. Why Daniel was pushing for it and he likes it. I mean, imagine if we went into the grand finals today and OpTic had effectively like a 30% chance of winning, a 25% chance of winning, versus a 45% chance of winning, 50% chance of winning. I think that it is just better for the league overall to have more unpredictable results, even if it is not as competitive, even if it is not as smart or fair to the winners bracket teams. But I would like to see more conversations about it. I would like the players to be able to weigh in and really give like a direct opinion to the league rather than just saying it on Twitter or saying it on a stream or whatever. I would like there to be some kind of dialogue between the actual players and the teams and the league. I don't know, like you, I don't know if that's actually going to happen. I don't know if there's going to be any resolution here or if there is any resolution to be had in the first place. But I certainly think for OpTic fans, it probably is like a nice change of pace, at least to get this one at the very end of the season after having those 3 disappointments earlier in the year. But just moving on and just thinking about OpTic in general, they were the only team to make it to 4 grand finals, of course, this season. I think it's fairly clear that, I mean, I'm sure people will say that LAT, they can make the case that LAT is the best team this season. Just simply like the last half of the season, they kind of dominated until losing this grand finals. I believe they broke the CDL record for a win streak, if I'm not mistaken. I believe they won 14 or 15 in a row. But now OpTic wins one. They get to 4 grand finals. How good do you feel about OpTic just in general this season? And do you feel like they are the best team in the 2026 season overall now?
I think it is close, and I think the reason it's close is because of the win streak for LAT, because that's just like downright ridiculous that they have, like, especially at points earlier this season. If you had told me in like February that this LAT team was going to have the record for the most consecutive CDL series won, I would have told you you're crazy. And that's just a testament to how they've improved over the season and how they've turned things around of late. But I think because OpTic won this tournament and because they made it to all 4 grand finals, you have to say that OpTic is the best team in the game, at least in the regular season. I think that's one of the things I highlighted last episode, is that now the narratives are much more interesting with OpTic winning this and there being the 4 teams that all won one tournament, because that effectively means champs and EWC have even more meaning in terms of who gets that title for best team in the game. And that is at the end of the day, champs was always going to be exciting, even if LAT won this event. But I think there would have been actually a little less excitement in like the general fan base if LAT had won this and they won 2 in a row. OpTic went 0-4 in finals. Like I think there would have been less people. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I'm talking, thinking out loud here. I obviously champs is champs and it's not going to be impacted to that degree. Um, but I just think if LAT had won back-to-back championships and OpTic was 0-4 in grand finals, like the hype might have just been a little less going into champs, as opposed to now OpTic are the defending champs going into champs. Obviously, they're the defending back-to-back winners of champs and going for that three-peat in that regard. You got the narrative aspect of like how all these awards are going to be impacted by the fact that, like, now if LAT had won 2 of these championships back to back to end the season, I think there would have been a lot of recency. I don't even think it's recency bias to the degree. It's just like the recency of LAT's dominance would have impacted the awards races. And as opposed to now, again, multiple players having championships, it's going to come down to more individual stats and stuff like that, as opposed to being like, oh, this guy has 2 championships, as opposed to somebody with 0 but might have better stats, like blah blah blah. Um, so I think overall, I I I think you have to say for the regular season at least, OpTic had the best season, especially because they won this final event and made it to all 4 grand finals. But I do think that conversation is a little more interesting because of the LAT historic win streak. So it really comes down to, in my eyes at least, do you place more value in winning the most CDL series ever versus making all 4 grand finals in an entire season? And I think for me, it's like just very narrowly the 4 grand finals, but it's really interesting.
And you also add in that LAT has a much better win record against OpTic during the season. I believe they're 5-2, including these grand finals. Obviously, they split the major grand finals that they played in, and I don't know how many times that they played on LAN of those 7 times. Obviously, it's at least 3, with the 2 times today, and then in Major 3. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly how many times, but either way, it is an interesting debate. We have Rickus Morty's in the Twitch chat saying that I'm high because I was kind of positing that LAT might be the better team. But I really don't think that it is an insane conversation. I want to have like a longer conversation about it after the season, of course, depending on who wins. Like if the Genomates win, like champs, for example, I think that would just be very interesting because Genomates were kind of not in the same way because OpTic was incredibly bad last year, but kind of like Genomates started off really well and then just went through a horrible stretch for most of the rest of the season. And then maybe they win champs and we can have that conversation of like, okay, they won 2 events more than anybody else, but they were also not nearly as consistent as LAT, as OpTic, maybe even FaZe in general. And we've had those conversations before about champs. Like it doesn't necessarily mean that that is the best team in that year. It is the best team on that weekend, and that doesn't really necessarily matter in the grand scheme of things. Like being the best team in a given game, it just nobody really cares about that. Nobody really pays attention to that nearly as much as they pay attention to the actual championship and getting a ring and all of that. But I thought that would be interesting to at least talk about. How much of this for LAT do you feel like was a choke? Because, I mean, I texted you it, that they were cruising an overload, 6 straight overload wins against OpTic. I think that they might be the best overload team in the game just by map count. But, man, like, they lose that, and then they lose the S&D, and it's, like, pretty bad. Like not close. And they had been beating the hell out of a lot of teams in S&D this weekend. How much do you think it is just OpTic being great? Is it being like, that's just what happens? Or how much of it is, hey, like the moment got to be a little too big? Like when they got put on the back foot right there, it got a little too big for them.
I would maybe consider the moment, or the lights are too bright, whatever you want to put on it, if this was like their first appearance in the finals and it was Neum's first finals. But the fact that this comes after they had already won a tournament like a month ago, like I don't put too much stock into that. I think it's just like, without looking at the records and stuff for the individual maps, the way that LAT played specifically in the 2 search and destroys before the final one to end the grand finals, I would consider, I mean, by definition, it was a choke because they had a 3-2 lead and then they lose 2 maps after that. So, I don't know. I think that's the only, like, outside of the technical portion of it, the fact that they lost the S&D so convincingly after, quite frankly, looking pretty good in the 2 S&Ds before that. That's the only aspect I would really say is like maybe partially a choke. But again, Gridlock is one of the newer maps. The CDL did post the veto video, so I don't remember who ended up picking that or whatnot. But um, I think it's fair to like bring it up as a point. I just don't know how much I would buy into it. Like I said, if this was the first time Neum was playing in a finals or something like that, maybe I'd consider it a little more. But like the three world champions, or sorry, two world champions,
Mm.
three multi champions, like I don't think it's much of a choke. I think if anything, it's a really good sign from OpTic that
Yeah.
you know they had their backs against the wall again. They had to be thinking about all those previous finals earlier in the season. They're like, just God damn it, we can't lose another grand finals, and they were able to stay resilient and get the job done. So if anything, I think now talking out loud again, uh, I would hard disagree about it being a choke on LAT side and just more so OpTic showing the resilience to finally get the job done.
Yeah, I don't believe that it's a choke either, but I know that the conversation will pop up because of the way that they lost being up 3-2 and the conversation that popped up after OpTic lost in Major 3. Of course, OpTic had lost, two majors before that as well, but I think the same kind of criteria can be applied to LAT as it was to OpTic because when people said it after Major 3 or after Major 1 or Major 2 or whatever, it's like, you guys do know that like these four players won the world championship last year, and like three of these players won the world championship the year before, or two, I guess maybe two of those players won the world championship the year before that. Like, to say that these players, and speaking about OpTic and LAT, like to say that it's like they're being consumed by it, I would say in some cases like the pressure is more intense, especially with a crowd like today or this weekend. I don't know how much of that plays into it. Like there were factions that were very anti-OpTic, especially Hydra being in the grand finals. Every time he got a kill on screen, the crowd was, oh, and like, so like there is part of that, but I just can't get around to the fact. I know I asked the question, but I felt it was more like a hypothetical. But like, these guys, LAT and OpTic, all of them are winners by any stretch of that definition. And I think it would be kind of silly to say that they're choking. Neum did, I want to say, probably have one of his worst series of his young pro career, especially like in this moment. I think he had like a 0.88 KD, and particularly in the response, he was kind of struggling, which that was where LAT kind of lost it in a sense because OpTic did well in the hard points and all of that. But yeah, I think it's an interest, like it. This is probably one of the more interesting outcomes, and I know we were talking a little bit
Yeah.
about that in the last episode about like if LAT wins, then it's all about LAT going into champs, and we're talking about like will the Thieves go 3P, or if you're counting the minors or whatever, but like, will they be able to just keep on this run? Can they reach 20 wins if they were able to go through Major 4 unscathed? And now, like, the conversation is, okay, OpTic finally did it. Can they do it again? Like, is this an anomaly, them actually winning? What if they get to the winners finals? Like, what if they get through winners bracket at champs? Does that change anything? Like, will the losers bracket, it's almost like a losers bracket advantage in this game? Will that pop up in a best of 9 series? Like, how does that all work? I mean, we've seen, like, for example, the Toronto Ultra very infamously like going through the winners bracket and then getting absolutely blasted 5-0 in a grand finals. I believe they went through the winners bracket, if I'm not mistaken, of that tournament. But like, there are a lot of questions coming out of that, and like that is the best possible scenario in my mind, unless it was like a complete shock victory, like Toronto being able to make like some kind of incredible run, or G2 or whoever making it all the way to the grand finals and winning it. I think that would be also pretty great. But yeah, I think this was a really fun outcome, a really interesting one. And it sets up a lot of questions over the
Yes.
next 2.5 weeks before champs. I do want to if you have, let's wrap up on grand finals talk right now.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw it out because I literally just saw it while you were talking, and I checked Twitter. Scraps tweet after the finals. He says, "GG's OpTic lost Game 7. Feels like we lost to ourselves." And I think that's a good way to put it, and as opposed to asking the question of did they choke or not. Like, I guess you would, again, like technically you would, if the team feels like they lost to themselves, they would probably tell you they choked to
Hmm.
some degree. But I think that's probably just a better way to word it, is like, but I don't like that totally because that could sound like taking some credit away from OpTic. But I think in a nutshell, LAT feels like they lost to themselves, and OpTic probably feels very good about finally getting the job done.
Yeah, and if you just look at the series overall, it went to round 10, the first S&D of the series. Like that is, I think pretty winnable for your OpTic, especially because none of them like particularly played super well. They were up at halftime. OpTic was in the first overload, and then they get blitzed in the second half, and they lose 7-3. It was a 7-point hard point win for OpTic in that second hard point. And then obviously, like we said, the gridlock overload, like LAT almost forced overtime in the second half. If they score one more, and I think they needed like one or two more kills, they probably could have, and then they win the series right there. And the only maps that really weren't close at all were the two of the S&Ds, the one that OpTic won, the second one that LAT won in that opening hardpoint, which is a 100-point club for OpTic. So, the majority of this series was very tight and could have went either way. And I'm sure LAT feels like, hey, like we really screwed up. We could have won this series in 5 maps, 6 maps, and we didn't. And I'm sure OpTic, if walking away from this, and I'm sure they're very happy, but I'm sure they're saying like we definitely could have won this series in 5 or 6 maps as well. Like if we shore up a few things, like I think this is an even more winnable series. Then we don't have to make it as difficult on ourselves moving forward. But yeah, obviously congratulations to OpTic. A really incredible tournament. Another losers bracket winner, which is I did look at Daniel's replies, and that was literally all of the replies when he congratulated OpTic after the tournament. So he's going to be dealing with that for a while. In general, let's just move on past the grand finals. The third place team of this event was the hometown Paris Gentlemates, and we had discussed them quite a bit during the Major 4 preview because this was the first major that they've had this specific roster after making the roster changes to drop Neptune and to trade Envoy to G2 Minnesota. Joe Thieves making his Paris debut as well as Estriel. And this was a very interesting tournament for this particular team because as we discussed in the preview, they had the toughest round 1 matchup of any of the winners bracket teams, at least like, the top 4, top 5 teams, because they played FaZe Vegas in round 1. They end up losing that first match 3-1. Then they drop down the losers bracket. They have to make a big run through the losers bracket, and they do so. They beat Cloud9 New York, of course, 3-0. Then they survive a Game 5 against the Miami Heretics, who certainly was a little sketchy in that first round matchup against Carolina, but they survive against Miami. They beat G2 Minnesota, who had beat the Riyadh Falcons in the winners bracket, and then they get their win back against FaZe in the losers semifinals, beating them in Game 5, and then they play OpTic in the losers finals, and they lose 3-0. How are you feeling about Paris? We discussed them at length about like, okay, where are they in terms of the power rankings? How close are they to LAT, to OpTic, to FaZe in those comparisons? And now they get third. This is their best performance since Major 1 when they won the Major. How are you feeling about the Gentlemates, and how much optimism do you have for them to make an even deeper run 2.5 weeks from now at Champs?
I guess in theory they could make a better run at Champs, just in the sense of this is still a very new team that has limited practice, and again with the whole like blacklisting thing we've talked about beforehand, it's even technically less practice than they could if they practiced every single day against the best teams like since making the Joe Deceased roster move. Um, I am not totally confident that this team. I'm not saying this correctly. I will say I think the crowd did play a big factor in Gentleman's
Mm.
success at this tournament. I'm not going to say it's the reason they got third place or anything like that, but I definitely think it helped them a lot. Like the crowd was electric at times. It also was pretty toxic at times, giving away information and stuff that, was
Yeah, we should talk about
a
that.
pretty big talking point this weekend. I was talking to you beforehand. And I don't want to put it all on, Gentlemates, but obviously, like when it's the French fans rooting for their home team, like it's
Yeah.
hard not to, uh, sound like we're singling them out. But like there were times where, um, the 04 went for a defuse during a 1v3, and he probably gets it if the crowd doesn't seemingly alert the Gentlemates player that I think it was Ghosty that he was defusing. Um, the other side of that is like 04 should know that he can't go for a ninja there with that crowd. Like obviously, 04 isn't like a super veteran player, but like you got to have some mental awareness in that situation of being like, yeah, I probably can't go for this without them giving it away. And it is a double-edged sword because he shouldn't have to think about that, but at the same time, like it's just an unfortunate reality of Call of Duty with a crowd. Like this has been a thing for years now. It
Yeah.
was just obviously amplified a little bit at this event for Gentlemates with that French crowd. The thing I was saying to you beforehand was I cannot remember another tournament where during a 1v whatever clutch situation in search and destroy, they were literally disabling the x-ray vision or the
Mm-hmm.
outline around players in Codcaster. And it quite frankly it was messing with me very hard. Like I think I
Yeah.
said it to you. I'm so used to seeing those outlines on my screen that like when they turned it off for the first time and I noticed, I was like, what the hell's going on? I thought something was going on with my computer, and like I was tripping. And uh I can't remember it ever. Like there have been times I think it will was it might it might have been Major One this year where like Hex like told the crowd to stop doing it.
Yeah.
um,
I think
but that might have
there
been
was like an
another
Abizi
tournament.
one where people were like, "All right, stop it! Like this is ridiculous." And
I just this has been a thing, but like I cannot remember other events where like they actually disabled Codcaster to try and prevent that. And I said to you, like that goes into a deeper conversation of how many people watch the gameplay versus watching the mini map.
mm-hmm.
Because if you watch the mini map, even if they take off the Codcaster, you can still give away some information, but obviously people are tuned in to that specific point of view that's put on the screen more so than the mini map, which has always been something interesting to me because talking to pro players and coaches over the years and stuff, they always talk to about like they don't even watch the point of view that's on the stream; they watch the mini map, and that's like the separator between some of that's just a big difference between a more casual fan and the people getting paid a lot of money to do this as a job. So, um, I think you got anything to say on the crowd? Go ahead, then we can dive more into Gentlemates.
Yeah, I think it's like I was telling you before the show, they have done it, plenty of times where they've taken off the X-ray vision and done it for like 2, 3, 5 seconds or whatever to kind of show what the player themselves in the game is seeing. That obviously it makes it so much easier, and it almost can fool you into thinking like, oh my god, this guy's such an idiot. Like how does he not know that he's right there? Because you can see through the walls, you can see through the map basically, and you can see on the mini map where everybody is. But like obviously, like if you don't have that information, which that is obviously a major part of this, is like when your teammates don't know where someone is and they haven't called it out, like it's kind of sketchy, especially in S&D. And like you, the when I was watching, I was like, oh, like I think like the first or second time that they did it, I was like, wait, what's going on? Like what happened? And like it does make you have to think a little bit more, even as a fan, because you're like, all right, like I guess I have to watch the mini map now, and that's not nearly as fun. Which there's a big push and pull throughout the entire league, but this is just like another example of it. Is like, do you do something that is better for the fans, and that is keeping the X-ray vision on so everybody can see what's going on in the game and that they don't have to watch the mini map, or do you do what is best for the players, and that is turn off the X-ray vision so everybody, like, if they're gonna crowd cheese, then they're gonna have to do it for the mini map. And I can see both sides to it. The league obviously made a decision during this tournament in particular that they were like, all right, like, we're going to do what is best for the players in this particular instance. And maybe it was just because it was so prevalent that they couldn't ignore it. But yeah, I think it's a really like, I don't know if they're going to do this for champs, because obviously it's different. It'll be in Vegas. I think it'll be a more, not relaxed vibe, but certainly not as crazy as it was in Paris this weekend. But like, is this the move going forward, that S&Ds have to have the X-ray pulled off, or, it's kind of on and off and just kind of situation dependent? But I don't know what the solution is. I don't think that there is one, because that's just like you said, this is like a thing that's happened for years. I don't, like, I'm sure it happened even on like the smaller like MLG nationals, like, it's a more intimate experience, so you definitely can get shamed a lot more when there's only like maybe 100 people in the crowd versus like 10,000 people in the crowd. But it's happened a lot before, especially in Ninja Diffuses, or like guys that just pass each other and they didn't see each other, but the crowd reacts like, oh, like, and the players are like, oh, like, what happened there? So they have to kind of turn around and it kind of explore that. But yeah, I think it's an interesting dilemma that the CDL has. I would not want to be in their shoes to have to make those kind of decisions, because there's no way to please everybody, especially if it's players versus fans. And I'm sure a lot of fans are kind of on board with it and everything, but particularly if you're looking for the casual viewer is not going to have a clue of what's going on. They're not going to be able to follow the mini map. And I was talking to you about League, and obviously you're much more up to date with League of Legends, but you can look at the mini map in League as well to kind of get a view of like what's going on, where everybody is on the map. But League is also much slower, and like you were saying, like, everybody's supposed to be in a particular position generally. Like, you have, like the jungler is kind of like iffy, like, you never exactly know. But and League of Legends, just by the way it is set up, is like it's much more zoomed out, and the observer can kind of look at all of these different players at once, where in Call of Duty, they technically can, but that's not as great of a viewing experience if you're just kind of doing the sky view rather than the point of view. But yeah, it's a very weird situation for the CDL to find themselves in, and I'm interested to see what happens at champs in regards to that. But the fans in general this weekend were crazy, and some of the loudest and in some ways most obnoxious fans in some of the most I don't want to say because there have been some pretty annoying fans in the past, but have you come around to the European fans? Are you willing to submit a formal apology to the Europeans for slandering their good name for, I don't know, the last decade or so?
No. Okay. I still think that, especially like a lot of the things that are said about European crowds and stuff is like they have so much better chance than people just saying let's go OpTic or let's go FaZe and all that. And again, this could just be a me thing, but like, there are times where these fans are chanting, especially this weekend, because it's different for EU in like London and whatever, because they at least speak English. But like this weekend, I thought there were multiple times where there were chants, and I was like, I have no idea what they're saying. Yeah. Like, it is what it is. Like, this weekend, there was at least a reasonable excuse for London events. Like, I suck with accents, so it is what it is. I thought the entrance for Gentlemates, though, when they did like the little pyro. Like the not only the pirate, like the song that they had for the intro that was like remixer. It's like I can't think of the song right now, but I knew it was like monsters.
Yep. Yep.
I can't think of the words right now, but like when I heard it for the first time, I was like, I know this song. And this is like a remix of it. Like, that's pretty sick. And then like the more it kept getting played, I was getting hyped up for it. So I like the intro. I like the production around the event and everything like that. But you know, is what it is. I definitely think it's not. The crowds have at the very least for other people, they have probably made it pretty convincing. Like I think it was the Easy Max tweet said that like Paris has to be a staple event going forward or whatever. He said Paris and then another location. It might have been Texas, I can't remember, but I was like in the back of my head, I was like, it should be Paris and Anaheim, but like obviously we don't have Anaheim
Yeah.
anymore. But like those, you know, I think if the CDL made Paris like a staple event every year going forward, there would be a lot of Brits who would be very like they'd be like, damn, we've been asking for this for years, and then they do this one event in Paris, and now they're gonna do it every year. Um, but yeah, don't gotta ramble on about that too much. I do think the crowd, for the most part, was I'll give it an A minus. They don't get an A or an A plus because of the cheese going on with giving away info and stuff like that. But like I said earlier, I'm not slipping that down to a B or anything because that is something that has happened with crowds regardless of where the events. I just felt at this event it did go to a slightly higher degree than we've seen at other events, and I think that is that's just the passion of this fan base, and that's something we have heard about so much since Gentlemates first got that spot last year. And I remember specifically talking about it on the podcast. It was the first event last year. Pretty sure Gentlemates got top 12. If they didn't get top 12, no, they definitely got top 12. Um, I just can't remember if they played a winners bracket match and then they lost, or if they only played one match and lost at the event last year. But regardless, I just remember
I think
there
it
was
was
like
just
a
one.
post that went around on Twitter of like the Gentlemates fans. Like this team literally just got basically last place, and the Gentlemates fan had like a big meetup afterwards, and they were all clapping and cheering for their team, even though they just got eliminated and didn't play well. And that was the first moment it really clicked for me, like how big this could be with Gentlemates entering the league, and then you hear about the numbers from the
Yep. Yep.
co-stream and the viewership and all that, and it's like, then it leads up to this moment this weekend where you finally see it in person, just how passionate the French fan base is about this group, and I think that's just a super positive thing for COD going forward.
Yeah, we've said it for years that the way that COD can grow, pretty much the only way that COD can grow is if OpTic gets to the grand finals and they lose typically to kind of like elevate whatever org that they were playing in the grand finals. But now I think we really have two organizations kind of like that. Like we do need the Gentlemates to have a competitive team in general, especially in an event like this where they're in Paris. But like I'm very intrigued to see what the viewership numbers end up being. Obviously it's a little bit different because it was earlier in
Yeah.
the day, and so those morning matches probably the viewership is going to be a lot lower than they would be if they were in America. But even like that losers finals against OpTic, like I would love to see what those numbers were, and some of the matches that Gentlemates just in general had this weekend.
I'll be interested to see. I wouldn't be surprised if the viewership was actually lower because there were so many of the fans watching in person.
Yeah, that's true.
Like I think that'll be an interesting variable to consider when we see the viewership metrics.
Yeah, they should tell them as soon as you walk in the building, you have to put YouTube on your phone and you can't exit out of it. Just so we have to get the viewership numbers as well. But
That was one other thing I'll say in the crowd, and then we can talk about the team unless you
yeah,
got anything else. There was the one chant, somebody in the YouTube chat who just brought it up. We got a bunch of people in the YouTube chat. Shout out everybody there. It was midnight. Midnight brought up, they were saying Hydra for Hydra in the first time. I think it was the chick who does the LEC stuff. She said it for the first time, and then that was the first time I heard them not say Hydra. They said Hydra, and then they started like doing that more, and I was like, this sounds kind of sick when they say that. Like obviously I don't know French, and I don't get the reasoning for it, but I thought that was cool. The other thing I'll say about the crowd too, there was one time. It wasn't even like a chant, but they were doing something with their phones with the lights, and instead of like like in concerts during slow songs or whatever, you go back and forth with the flashlight on your phone. That is what it is. They were doing something though where like they were throwing it up and down and like bopping, and it was like it looked cool. I don't remember. I'll have to look up a clip if I can see it. Um, but I do think that's, just overall. I will, back to your original point, I will say this crowd was definitely my favorite European crowd of all time.
Chicken Chunks said in the YouTube chat that was a huge arena, and that's kind of like, especially when they would zoom out and kind of look at everybody, especially when it was all filled in, and when they were kind of going crazy, like you were saying, like when the lights are moving and you're like, all right, like this is kind of crazy, almost looks like a concert in some ways, and that is the exact vibe that the CDL needs to replicate in every one of these events, because, and we've said this like I don't even know how many times, but like the Call of Duty is not like a button up professional sports league like everybody else. Like the NBA, when you look at Madison Square Garden, obviously they're going crazy during the Knicks championship, but it is a lot of rich people. It's a lot of people that are like in kind of suits or like in dress shirts. Like that's not the vibe that esports in general gives, and especially Call of Duty, because Call of Duty is much closer to Halo and Gears of War, which is a much more like grungy esport than even like League of Legends. Counter-Strike is similar, but Counter-Strike is decidedly more like European in nature, and then Call of Duty, which is mostly North American, but obviously has like a very passionate following in France and Spain and England, or the UK in general. But yeah, like I would love for like not just Paris, like I would love for France in general to get a major every year, because there are different cities in France that probably could host this, and especially if the Genomates are good and competitive, I'm sure that they would travel a little bit to get and watch their team. We should also note that it was apparently like the heat wave going across
Yeah, I was just gonna
Europe
say that.
is ridiculous. Like I saw Brian Saint's tweet where he had to move hotels and stuff, and he said he couldn't sleep because he was so hot, and his phone wouldn't charge because it was so hot in his room at night. So obviously, like hopefully everybody is safe and sound in Europe, and I know that the heat wave is hitting the United States this weekend. Like it's pretty warm today, but it's supposed to be like in the 95s, nearly 100 this weekend. So but for people to be like, yeah, like maybe they were just going to the event because there was air conditioning ostensibly in that arena, so they were probably like, this is the best place to be to get out of the heat. I don't know, but just in general with the Genomates, just to kind of wrap up like that portion, this gives me a lot of hope. And we talked about it on the last show that like they would have to prove it, obviously, because we hadn't seen them do anything of note on LAN for like the past 4 months, basically since Major 1. And they had that little bit in Major 2 qualifiers where they looked all right, and then they just completely fell apart. And they had their brains broken apparently by the Riyadh Falcons at Major 3 that led to the roster change. But this certainly gives me a lot of hope that they could be a champs contender in a few weeks. They're going to have a little bit of practice, and hopefully they didn't do anything to piss people off and get blacklisted from scrims, which kind of plagued them a little bit right when they got put together. But very interesting that they were able to beat FaZe in that second match that they had against them, and get their win back after losing to them in the winners round 1 match. Midnight in the YouTube chat said the phone light thing was awesome. The UK crowd was awesome too. What do we think of Mage shit? What do you think of Mage shit? Yeah, like I am not as nearly as pessimistic and negative about the Europeans as Justin Binkowski is, even though like he has a much more European last name than me. But like maybe it's just because they haven't gone to Katowice and they've followed in the Counter-Strike's footsteps. But I'm all for the Europeans to get their events. I would love, especially if you're going to have an all Spanish team in the Heretics, there should always be a Spanish event at least once a year. If you're going to have the Paris Genomates in the league, and you act like, I mean, we did have a Paris team for years, quote unquote. But now that we actually have like a Paris owned or a French owned team, and we have French speaking players like Obviously, Hydra and Abuza is also French speaking. Like, we have to exploit that. We have to take advantage of that as a league. So whether it's like in Belgium or it's in France or wherever, like they need to put a an event there. There has to, obviously there's a lot of British players. They have to go to Britain at least once a year, whether it's England or not. But
I can't do 3 EU events in 1 year.
well, just increase the number of events in general, and then it doesn't make it seem as bad. Like I feel like this is what we need more of is, I don't like the times. Like the times piss me off, and that's never going to change. That always happens if there's like an Olympics, like even this year when it was in Italy. It's like, all right, like guys, like I know you're going to air it later in the day, but I like to watch it live, and I'm not able to watch everything live because of work and everything. But in general, I think that it is a great experience for those fans, and I think it gets them kind of committed and invested in these teams, especially when UK doesn't have a team anymore because the Royal Ravens are dog shit and they abandoned their country. But I there are so many British players, and UK is like the second biggest like COD scene, other than like obviously Canada or whatever. So just in general, I would love for them to keep going back there. The Gentlemates, again, a lot more hope about them. I do want to move on, unless you have anything else on the Gentlemates. We have to talk about FaZe at least. How do you feel about them? Because this did not help my point of view, because they kind of helped with the 6-0 week that they had last week online. Granted, it's online and all that, but then they beat Paris. Then they lose game 5 to LAT. Then they beat Toronto. I don't think that really means a ton to me because I don't think much of Toronto just in general. And then they lose game 5 to Paris. So they lose game 5, two game 5s, and that's kind of how it goes for them. They get knocked out in the losers semifinals. They don't even get to play OpTic in this tournament. So where are you with FaZe, especially in relation to, we think very highly of OpTic and very highly of LAT, and Paris had their best performance in, 4 or 5 months on LAN, and now FaZe gets a top 4 finish. How do you feel?
Yeah, so I did want to talk a little bit more about Gentlemates, but
Sure.
I can loop it in with FaZe here just because we talked on not a ton about the actual gameplay from Gentlemates this weekend, and I do think it does relate to FaZe because this is the second consecutive event where FaZe have gotten 4th place. But if you go a step further, it's the second consecutive event where they get eliminated in the losers bracket by the team that they beat in winners round 1.
Yep.
Obviously, last event it was LAT. They beat them winners round 1, pulled off a reverse sweep, and then they lost to them in the losers bracket. This time it's Gentlemates. And then if you go even a step further, FaZe arguably should have beat LAT in winners round 2. They were up 4-1 in the game 5 against LAT and almost pulled off another reverse sweep against LAT. And this was really the first moment where the whole crowd thing kind of clicked for me, was in the round 11. 04 seemingly had a perfect flank lined up where he saw the players on LAT cross on his screen on Den, and the crowd, LAT having Hydra, a French player, seemingly, again, we don't know how much it affected, but it seemed like they had no idea 04 was going to be behind them. He comes down the stairs, probably gets a 2-piece, possibly even a 3-piece, but the LAT players turn at the exact moment where he goes for the kill and he only gets 1. And that kind of, sealed the deal. Obviously, it was only a 3v3 after that, but other stuff happens around the map too, and FaZe choke it. But, I mean, I guess that goes back to your original conversation of the choke. Like, FaZe was up 4-1 in that search to pull off a reverse sweep and send LAT to the losers bracket. Would have ended LAT's win streak for the series, all that. and that doesn't they were up almost 100 points in the map one that they lost to LAT as well. So
Yeah.
I do think that could get lost in the sauce, for lack of a better term. And when looking at FaZe's performance overall this weekend, I do think, without looking at the specific numbers, I felt like once again there were situations this weekend where a lot hinged on Simp. And I don't want to be like, you know, because obviously we've sung Simp's praises for years on this podcast, and you and I both think very highly of him. Um, but especially in the online, there were times recently where it felt like if Simp was playing poorly, FaZe had absolutely no shot, and I feel like that was true in certain moments this weekend as well. When Simp was doing his thing, like he kind of fried in the first series against Gentlemates, and they won. Let me just I can click on that real quick. He had a 1.28 in the first series against Gentlemates. I gotta scroll down. And Simp had a 1.1 today, so that doesn't matter against Gentlemates. But I know, it didn't feel like series overall, but it felt like there were individual maps this weekend where if Simp was struggling, FaZe, you know, didn't look as strong. And when Simp was playing like the MVP Simp we know, that's when FaZe was finding some success this weekend, because a lot for a large portion of this tournament, the three other guys on FaZe were playing pretty well. 04 had some takeover moments again. There was, I think it was actually in that um the LAT series. Yeah, it was. He dropped 45 kills in the map 4 against LAT in the winners bracket. Draza had 39 in the overload. So it was that LAT series is the map the series I was thinking of in terms of Simp. Went 22 and 30 in the map 1, which was the lowest kills in the lobby there. 4 and 7 in the map 2 S&D, which 4 and 7 is what it is. Like, it's not terrible, but it's not great. And then 2 and 9 in the game 5 that went round 11. Like, that's not what you expect from Simp, especially with how good of an S&D player he is. So, I think overall for FaZe, like, I do think that, especially, I'm glad we had a chance to talk about it here in terms of the LAT versus FaZe winners bracket match, because I feel like that's a match that could get very pushed down the priority list in terms of like forgetting it actually happened, because that was a very close match and that could have drastically changed how the tournament played out. um but at the end of the day, it is another fourth place finish for FaZe, and I do think it's a question of, I don't know how much you really, because I do think I was impressed at moments with FaZe this weekend, and it was just at other moments it didn't click. And I do think it could be, again, not going to put it all on Simp, but I think if Simp plays like MVP Simp, and the other three guys play the way they did this weekend alongside Simp playing at his best, I think FaZe becomes a very scary team for champ. So I don't think I'm actually as down on FaZe as some other people might be. I do think they should have beat Gentlemates earlier today. And I think if they did beat Gentlemates, they probably do lose to OpTic in the losers finals, or LAT if LAT had dropped down to the losers finals. So I don't think this is a situation where it's like, FaZe got screwed by the crowd and they had a shot to win or anything like that. I still think LAT and OpTic are better teams than FaZe right now. But I don't, maybe it's just a FaZe thing with me. I don't know. I don't think I'm as down on FaZe right now as maybe some other people are.
We're about an hour in, so I'll just do a quick ad because we have quite a few people in the YouTube chat, and some people in the Twitch chat as well. If you are watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel. I think we're at 316 subscribers before today's episode. So, if we could get 320 by the end of the day, I think that'd be awesome, especially, OpTic hangover, probably not, like, it's kind of like a party right now. Might be hungover tomorrow, but I think the OpTic boys winning is always fairly good for just the COD scene in general. So please subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're watching on YouTube. If you're on Twitch, please follow. I think we're at 39 followers on Twitch. So please follow there. If you want to subscribe, you can do so with your Amazon Prime subscription. It's completely free. And I believe Twitch has a sale if you want to gift any subs. So you can get 35% off for the subs that you gift as well. That's done for my ad, which felt very weird, but we're trying to make money here. This is a money making business, and we're not doing very good at that. But FaZe, I'm pretty much in the same exact place with FaZe as I was entering this tournament, and that was I'm just skeptical that they're going to be able to actually repeat the same performance that they had at Major 2. That seems more like an anomaly than anything. I think where they are currently, and that was obviously a fourth place finish at this tournament, and that's kind of been right around where they've been at Major 1 and at Major 3. And I think that's just about where they are. Like when we entered this season, I'm sure you remember, we were both very skeptical of this roster. They certainly were not at the top of our power rankings at the beginning of the season. We didn't think that they were some kind of like world championship contending team. Even with if saying like Simp played very well, and I think we both expected him to, but this was not the roster that we had seen from FaZe over the past 5 or 6 years that we thought were world championship level teams, regardless of like who was popping off on an individual map. That's obviously just not the case. Simp has to play well. We've seen it time and time and time again this season. If he's not playing his best, this team just doesn't have like a real good shot at winning. Maybe like at Major 2, 04 has like the tournament of his life and he kind of takes over. And that's not to belittle 04 because he's been a very good player for the past few seasons, but he played particularly well at Major 2, and to the point where like, okay, if he does this, then it takes a lot of weight off Simp's shoulders and they can win more matches, more tournaments exactly like this. But that's a very hard formula to keep replicating time and time again, especially if LAT finds their groove like they have over the past back half of this season. If OpTic continues to be what OpTic has been for most of this season, and that's just a very consistent high-level championship team, if the Gentlemates are able to really start improving and kind of turn around a season that seemed lost, it really puts FaZe in a difficult position, and I don't necessarily think that certainly they can win a championship. I don't want to exclude them from that conversation by any means, but I think like they have a lot harder path for themselves because of the way that the team is constructed than they have been in the past years. And that's very difficult. And I think like some people are going to have a hard time like coming to grips with that just because you see FaZe and you're like, all right, like top 2, maybe like, getting to the grand finals, maybe you're going to lose, you're getting a championship Sunday. But it just doesn't seem to be clicking the same way. And maybe I'm completely off base here, and maybe at champs they'll prove me wrong. It's been kind of the opposite in the past few years, where they've been very, very good for most of the season, and then at champs it's been a complete letdown. I think it was back-to-back top 6 finishes, which is like that's kind of like an abysmal failure for a team like FaZe to only win like one match at champs in a year. So yeah, I think I'm exactly where I was entering this tournament with FaZe, and that was pessimistic and very hesitant to go all in with them. And I think maybe when we do our power rankings, we update our power rankings. Maybe they'll be slightly lower. I don't know, like they'll drop a tier or whatever, but I think maybe pushing Gentlemates above them is on the table. But we'll cross that street when we get there. Anything else on FaZe before we move on?
No, I don't think so. Midnight just brought up in the YouTube chat, do you think FaZe would like to get Cell back? And I think that's a very interesting conversation. I think we should talk about Falcons a little bit because we both made some statements about them on the last episode.
I'm not sure what
did
you're
not go
speaking
well
of.
for them. but it seemed pretty obvious from the split up for Atlanta phase before Vegas phase that Simp, Abizi, and Celium were just content going their separate ways. So I'm not sure if uh, a Simp and Cell reunion is in the cards, but you know, I don't think it's totally out of the realm of possibilities either.
Yeah, I don't. It's weird because Selim has just like, maybe it's just the team around him that hasn't really stepped up. Because I think statistically he's still like one of the top players and all of that, but it's just been not what you want. Like when you think of Celium going to the Falcons with this team, I think we both expected more from this team. Like there's just no way, no other way to put it. Yeah, he's currently, according to Breaking Point, he has the third highest overall KD, is the fourth highest hardpoint KD, but he has the 45th S&D KD. He's a
That's
0.94,
crazy.
which obviously like he's been known to be a very good S&D player for his entire career. And I mean, like that's crazy. And I don't know, like, does that solve itself if he went back, just for example, like if he goes back to FaZe, and there's no indication that that's going to be the case. I mean, that I don't even know what the logistically how that would work with how much money he's reportedly being paid. But let's say he goes back to FaZe and he takes over for Abuza, he takes over for Draza, whoever. How, does he just automatically become a better S&D player? Does he have that big of an impact on FaZe to take them from like a top 4 team to pushing them into the grand finals or something? Like I don't know. And maybe that's just because we haven't seen him be in these big moments this season. So like it's kind of
Yeah.
like almost like a recency bias, but like the opposite, where we're kind of forgetful of what he could do. But like to me, it's like, all right, like, he is what he is, but I don't know how much he can push FaZe from a top 4 team to a top 2 team.
I think it's pretty the easiest way to answer that is like Celium's always going to put up his stats, and obviously there have been examples this year where he hasn't had good series or good events, and uh, that's part of the issue for Falcons in those moments. But like the fact he still has that high of a KD or whatever you were outlining the fact his numbers are that good regardless of how Falcons have played as a unit this year, is indicative of like Cell's always gonna get his statistically. I think if he did go to FaZe, I think the S&D numbers would be better though, because like that's just a super big surprise to me in terms of Celium individually. But if you look at Falcons as a team overall this year, it makes sense that he would be struggling in S&D because their Falcons S&D has been a talking point in the community
Yeah,
all
they stink.
season. So not the most surprised there, but yeah, it is kind of crazy like to think about like Celium, a perennial all-star and MVP of the entire league, like and we're sitting here like, maybe him going to FaZe wouldn't really move the needle. Like if you told me that a year ago, I probably wouldn't believe you.
Yeah, Falcons have a 24-31 S&D record, and that's the only game mode in which they have a losing record. They're 36-35, so just barely above 500 in hardpoint, and then 28-16 in overload. I think it's funny though that Celium has a 0.94 KD, but he has the highest damage per round of anybody on the Falcons. He has a 113. The next highest is Pred, who has a 1.01 KD and a 101 damage per round. So like it's fairly interesting. I disagree. Let's get into the Falcons because they're certainly the most disappointing team of this tournament, by like a large margin, I think. So they lose round 1 to G2 Minnesota, and that was always on the table. I thought they would win. I think you also predicted.
They just beat him.
Yeah. And like I laid out on the last show, the Falcons were like 9-4 or something in their last 13 matches, and the only losses that they had were to like OpTic, LAT, and like maybe FaZe. So all the top teams but they had been able to beat consistently G2. I think they had beaten FaZe and Paris in that group. They had beaten like the lower tier teams, which is not something that they could necessarily say earlier in the season when I believe they beat OpTic and then they lost immediately to the Vancouver Surge. So like that was certainly not a good thing that they were doing earlier in the season, but they had seemingly addressed that and they had seemingly become like a middle tier team and potentially like with a good land performance at Major 4, I was ready to just be like, all right, like they are a champs contender, not like not the top team, not the second or third team, but like they have a real shot at winning champs. And then they laid an egg. They looked horrendous. They lose to G2 Minnesota in game 5. Okay, it happens. G2 has been in a ton of game 5s. This is the one time that G2 was like, all right, like, you know, G2 had just lost a game 5 to the Falcons, 6 days before. So they get their win back. Okay, you can understand that to a degree. Then they drop down, the Falcons drop down to the losers bracket, and they play the Toronto Koi, who we had completely written off because they abandoned all hope for their season. They decided that it was better to get the bag than to potentially compete for a championship. And again, that's their choice. I don't agree with it, but that was their choice. But as a result, we thought Toronto dead in the water and potentially like a bottom 4 team at the end of this season rather than a top 4 team. Well, the Falcons go down the losers bracket and they get mollywopped by Toronto. They lose 3-0. They get swept. They get double first rounded in this tournament. And it's incredible. Like it defies logic that a team with Celium, reportedly the highest paid player in the CDL, a former MVP, one of the best players over the last decade in Call of Duty, with Pred, a former world champion, a MVP level player, granted whatever's happened over the last few seasons, but like it is not up for debate that he is an extremely talented player and he was highly sought after for multiple years, including by the Falcons. Exnid certainly much improved over what he came into the CDL as, and probably doesn't deserve as much hate and as much like skepticism, notwithstanding what we're seeing and what we're talking about now. But you can make the argument that he's a lot better than he was. And then, of course, our Bulldog, Kismet, is former champs MVP, former world champion, integral player in a world championship run. And we've seen when he is at his best and when he is in a role that fits him, he can be a dominant player and like a really crucial player. And this team got top 12 at Major 4 with a major that included the Miami Heretics, who just have looked awful on land all of this season. That included the Toronto Koi, who, like we just said, abandoned any championship aspirations like 4 weeks ago. The Boston Breach, who blew up their roster. They got rid of their best player, Nasty, 4 weeks ago, and decided like they didn't even have championship aspirations, but they were like, well, we don't even care about like winning. And yet they've been able to turn their season around, or, like they did not turn around, but I mean, like the Titanic, it was kind of like they slowed the sinking, I guess, in the analogy, but they even won a match. And yet the Riyadh Falcons did not. And I said it to you in our text message, but they're on the no believe list. I cannot, we've put the Carolina Royal Ravens, we put the G2 Minnesota, we put the Vancouver Surge, we put a bunch of different teams, and I had tentatively put the Toronto Koi on that list, and I am officially, by official decree, I am taking the Toronto Koi off of that list, and I am putting the Riyadh Falcons on that list, because you cannot get double first rounded at a major after I said you potentially could win the major. You cannot do that. It's illegal. I don't know what the bylaws are locally in Paris, but I have half a mind to send the Parisians after Clayster. I'll call up and say that he's been smuggling zins in his backpack or something. I will get him arrested because this is absolutely ridiculous what they put me through. They made me look foolish, and that happens a lot, but they don't need to do that. I do that myself. And again, I'm very upset. And yeah, I believe that they should not be able to go to champs. I think the Boston Breach should be able to replace them. So that is my rant. You were not as high on the supply of the Riyadh Falcons, and congratulations for that. But this is like, I mean, you said it on the last show that they have to blow it up. You said if they got top 12, they'd have to blow it up. And do you feel that way? How does that even work at this point in the season?
Well, that's one thing I'm not sure of, because didn't Snoopy go in?
Yes.
He made his debut at Champs in Vanguard, right?
Yes, they qualified for Champs with a different roster, and his first pro event was Champs.
But was he already on the team as a substitute before that, and that's how he was able to be inserted into the roster?
I don't know technically if he was a substitute. I know that they had the academy roster, but I don't know if those guys were all subs on the team.
Yeah, so that's what I'm thinking here is maybe QK could be inserted into this team for Champs, and then they could potentially make another move for EWC.
Maybe.
I don't know for sure, because I don't even know if QK played at this last event. I know he didn't play at Major 3 because there was something going on, so maybe QK isn't an option, even if he is like technically a sub for them. But regardless of specifics or whatever, I don't know if they can technically make a roster move for Champs. I 100% think if they can, they should make at least one change. If they can't, it is what it is. I will not have high expectations for them at Champs. I 1000% though, they have to make a move for EWC unless they somehow get top 2 at Champs, which I just do not think is happening right now based on the way other teams are playing and based on what they showed us this weekend. I think they have to make a move for EWC, and they have to try and identify what direction they're going to go in for next season, because that's been the big thing since that whole QK debate and trial situation came up earlier this year. Like, the mix and match with a Saudi and NA team, that approach, or do they go down all NA? Do they go back to doing an all Saudi team with some of the Saudi talent that has emerged this year in particular? I think they have some very tough decisions to make this offseason, and I think they have a chance to try to expedite that process by being proactive and making some change at EWC. And I'm not saying that the change they make for EWC is going to lock in somebody for their roster for 2027, but I think if they make a change and they play much worse than they did earlier, they could maybe be like, okay, then maybe like what we had earlier just wasn't as bad as we thought at some point. But if they make a change and do better, they can be like, okay, this is a sign that obviously what we tried this past season didn't work. We have to try something different. And I think they do have to try something different regardless of the results that end this season. But end of the day, I think it is very clear to me that this four-man roster cannot compete for Falcons at EWC. I would probably be more passionate about it if EWC was in Saudi, because like the home crowd factor, kind of what we talked about with Gentlemates making the splash to get Joe before their event in Paris. I would maybe feel a little bit more passionately about that if that was the case for EWC coming up, but obviously with the EWC in Paris, I don't think that's as big of a deal for Falcons specifically in terms of trying to do something for the crowd impact and whatnot. But yeah, I think this event, especially like them losing to Toronto, the way Toronto came into this event and some of their stumbles on like Toronto without Joe Deceives being able to lose them 3-0, just that I did say I thought Toronto had a shot to make a little bit of a run in the loser bracket based on how the bracket shook down, so I was right in that regard, but I did not expect, even if Toronto did beat Falcons, for it to be a 3-0 the way it happened. So yeah, I am definitely out on Falcons like you. And now this is setting us up hilariously for Falcons to somehow go on some miracle run at Champs and make us look stupid in another way.
Yeah, I I don't want to get into it too much because I think the next show that we do will be committed to teams that like trying to predict roster mania or like what should happen in this period in between, like if teams actually could. But like the only like high profile player that is like available right now is Neptune, and like I don't the roles don't necessarily match. Like, I mean, but the roles don't really make sense in the team anyway, because that's been one of like the key sticking points for this entire season is that they basically have 3 SMG players. And, you know, granted, that isn't necessarily a bad thing with NPC meta because sometimes you see 4 SMGs on the same map. But I mean, it's if you're going to pay Celium how much they're reportedly paying him, like, buying out Neptune for one event, or you know maybe he's under contract for another year after this as well, but like buying him out and being like, all right, we're just gonna try something, like, you know, maybe it's not gonna work, but like we went down swinging and we didn't let our roster completely rot away. And like if they finish this season, let's just say with this top 12, and then they get double first rounded at champs and get top 8, what the hell was this season for? Like this, like the Paris Legion, the Vegas Legion were doing something similar to this. Like there's no point to pay all this money if you're not going to be able to compete. And right now they're not even like close to being able to compete. Like you got swept in the losers bracket, you know, like you won as many maps in the losers bracket as Cloud9 New York did. So like there's no way out of that. Like that has to be confronted. There has to be change. But again, I would like to get into it a little more in depth on a future episode. Obviously, we're kind of pushing up like hour 20, hour 30 now. You know, and we can talk about some of these other teams, and that's probably the best way to think about it is like, you know, we haven't really talked about G2 Minnesota, the Miami Heretics. Boston Breach ended up winning a series on LAN, which is always great for them. We didn't talk about any of the teams that didn't make it out of losers round 1 aside from the Falcons. And we also didn't talk about how the Carolina Ravens, they needed to get second place. They were so close, so very close. They ended up losing in losers round 1 in game 5 to the Miami Heretics. And on that note, I should just say that the champs field is set. The bracket is set. I'm trying to scroll through. Is it in our notes or is it in Twitter?
What?
The champs bracket. I saw that.
At top.
Okay. So the champs bracket is set, and it's pretty interesting. I know there were people that were that link does not work. I think they deleted it because they are stupid, or maybe they thought that it would take away from it. Let me see if they had retweeted it. So either way, the champs bracket is obviously OpTic at the very top of the bracket. Let me see. This is great podcasting. Fucking
not our fault.
No. This is always Daniel's fault. We need to blame him specifically. Yeah, I believe they deleted it because I think there could have been some points moving around with FaZe and LAT coming into today, because if FaZe had ended up getting like second or first, they could have jumped LAT, where LAT couldn't jump OpTic or whatever. But if COD Gamepedia is correct, and I'm just going to go off of it, you know, we were debating about like the schedule with, you know, COD Gamepedia and the CDL website and the CDL Twitter account. They all seem to be different at different points of time, especially the point standings are also different. But according to COD Gamepedia, the bracket for CDL Champs 2026 is OpTic as the number 1 seed playing the Miami Heretics, the number 8 seed. They ended up falling 5 points short of the Riyadh Falcons. LAT will play the Riyadh Falcons in the first round as the 2 versus 7. Then you have FaZe Vegas who finished third. They will play G2 Minnesota, which is very interesting because obviously G2 had quite a bit of success against FaZe early on this season. And then the 4 versus 5 is the Paris Gentlemates versus the Toronto Koi, which would be a lot more interesting if Joe was still on Toronto and not on Paris. But it's interesting because they do play each other in that way anyway. What do you think about how this all shook out? I think people said that OpTic has the, do they have the harder side of the bracket? Because one side has FaZe, obviously, one side has Paris, and obviously like OpTic and LIT are on the opposite sides. Where do you kind of fall on like where, which one would you rather be, OpTic or LIT, in the path that they have?
I'd rather be OpTic just because they, technically the toughest team for them should be Gentlemates on that top half of the bracket, and they just 3-0'd them today. LAT and FaZe, as we outlined earlier, FaZe arguably could have beaten LAT in the winners bracket of this event, and they beat them in the winners bracket of the event previously. So, I think OpTic have a little bit of an easier quadrant there, or half of the bracket, I guess, since it's only an 18 bracket. But quite frankly, I mean, we'll get into it with our champs preview and stuff, but like the 4 champs, or the 4 major winners this year, should be the top 4 at champs, and I think something would drastically have to happen and shift over these next couple weeks in order for that to change. But I think it's going to be chalk in the first round, and then we should hopefully get some good matchups between those top 4 teams. And like even the ones that drop down to the losers bracket, they should be able to take care of business against like Miami, Toronto, Falcons, and G2. But yeah, I think just pretty bluntly, like I think it's a 4-team race for champs, and you could probably narrow that even more, but I think there's really only 4 teams that have my full attention going into champs.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the same case. Like I was trying to think, hey, maybe G2, maybe Falcons as a few weeks ago. I think that's pretty much out the window now. I think we see pretty clearly that we have those 4 teams, and that those are the 4 teams that have even a remote shot at winning champs. And I'm sure there's going to be some debate about how much of a shot that Paris or FaZe in particular have at winning, considering we've seen OpTic and LAT really show up over the past few months, but it's been hit or miss for those other 2 teams. But yeah, I definitely think that this bracket is relatively indicative of this season, all things considered. I mean, like Miami, out of these 8 teams, probably, I mean, not at least at this point, if it was just based on like what happened at Major 4, you'd be like, all right, Falcons are definitely the 8th place team, and then we can kind of go from there. But I think for the season, with how poorly Miami played on LAN this entire season, I think it makes a lot of sense. G2 being like a 6 seed does make quite a bit of sense because they've had some wins, they've had some success, just not nearly enough of it. But yeah, I like this bracket. I think you're entirely jinxing it when you say that it's probably going to be chalk in round 1, because that like literally never happens. But if we got OpTic versus Paris and LAT versus FaZe in winners round 2, we're cooking. Like the tournament is really spicy because that some of those teams have to lose, and that makes them go through the losers bracket, potentially knocks them out. Like, we've seen obviously FaZe go out relatively early in the past 2 champs. Maybe that happens again. Maybe LAT drops down the losers bracket. We have seen that also happen this season, where they had to go through the losers bracket. So yeah, I think it's gonna be interesting. Any kind of final thoughts on Major 4 in general? We will talk about the other teams, the teams that we just didn't get to, and of course the teams that didn't make champs. I'm planning on having like an in memoriam where we can actually talk about them a little more in depth. We have like 2.5 weeks between now and champs, and so I think there's like 4 or 5 shows that we're gonna do in between that. Yeah. One of those shows will be mostly, if not entirely, dedicated to those 4 teams and just how much they fucking suck and how much they need to blow it up. How much, honestly, those 4 teams need to stop being in the CDL. Like I will I'm going to make the argument that like those are literally the 4 most deserving teams to be relegated and shot out of a cannon
Okay.
into challengers for like the rest of our lives. And I'll make that argument, but I wanted to tease it a little bit.
Yeah, I'm cool with 3. I think Boston has done enough to not be pushed to that extreme of like get them out of here. And I have been vocal about Boston being that team for years to enter the league, being willing to host events and all that stuff. So I'm willing to give Boston a little bit less scrutiny in that regard, and they can stick around. But I agree with you on the other 3, and I definitely say I'd argue we don't even need to talk about Cloud9 or ever bring up that name. Like, they can be like Voldemort and Harry Potter, like the org that shall not be named or whatever. Like that it's just a disgrace. They don't even deserve for us to talk about them at this point based on what they've put out there in terms of the product. So, um, but yeah, in terms of the other teams we didn't really touch on, I don't think there's honestly much. Like even a team like G2, like they get top 6, but they beat Falcons and then they lose to OpTic and Gentlemate. So they went 1-2 and got a top 6 placing. Like Toronto gets top 6, they at least had to win 2 matches and they went 2-1 because they started in losers bracket. But I don't think there's much. I think really that's just the way it is in the CDL right now. Is like some of these other teams, they might, you know, battle it out amongst each other, especially when we get to champs. And if it is chalk in the first round, some of those losers bracket round 1 matches could dictate who gets a little more money than the other team. But I don't think they're going to have a major impact on the tournament overall. And especially what we saw from some of those other bottom teams this weekend. Like I think it is a lot of a lot of them are non-factors at this point of the season, and that's just the reality of the situation.
And I think that about does it for today's episode. We're about an hour and a half in. Again, we'll talk about those bottom 4 teams and some of the teams that we didn't get to really chat about on the next episode. Please, or I guess before pick them, I shouldn't gloss over this because it's a pretty big thing. You went 12-6, so you are 186-90 on the season. I went 14-4. So I'm 187-89. I have retaken the lead, as it is my God-given right to be in the lead of our pick'em. And of course, Tremor is still winless on the year. Real Cloud9 New York of the season. Please like, subscribe, follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on, or on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, as well as YouTube and Twitch. You can watch the live stream of the podcast. We typically do them on Sundays and Wednesdays. Sunday evenings, although this was probably one of our earliest, but typically Sunday evenings and Wednesday afternoons. And we'll be doing those live streams on Sundays and Wednesdays. The podcast goes live on the feed, typically on Monday morning and Thursday mornings. You can, again, subscribe, follow, subscribe to the YouTube. You can also subscribe on Twitch. You could follow on Twitch. You can follow and subscribe to Bink on Twitch, twitch.tv/jbink with 2 Ks. The Ego Chall Podcast, Twitch is twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. The Twitter for both of us is at jbink with 2 Ks, at Preston Byers, and the podcaster is at Ego Chall Podcast. And Champs is 2.5 weeks away. It starts on Thursday, July 16th, goes through Sunday, July 19th. The tentative plan for what we're doing over the next few weeks is doing a show on Wednesday, like we said, talk about some of the teams that we hadn't gotten to. If we smash it together with that in memoriam, then it remains to be seen what happens with the following Sunday, July 5th. We might pre-record that show just, because it is 4th of July weekend and who knows what we'll be doing. But I plan to have a show on Sunday and Wednesday, or, the feed on Monday and Thursday for the foreseeable future until after champs. But then we will do that in memoriam. Then we're going to do CDL awards, which we're going to kind of retrospective, like to actually see what we did and what we picked back in like late November, early December, and how it matches up, and give our picks for the MVP, Rookie of the Year, all the All-Star teams and all of that. So we'll do that in like a week and a half. And then the goal is to do our final power rankings update and the champs preview on the live show on Sunday, July 12th, with the podcast going up on Monday, July 13th. And then that'll give you guys, 3-4 days to watch or listen to that before champ starts. And then we'll obviously play it by ear after that. And cover champs and everything. So that is the tentative plan. We'll probably talk about it off air to kind of finalize everything. But it is obviously the end of the CDL regular season. It has been a long regular season. We started back in late November and early December, and getting geared up for it. Even the preseason tournaments that were kind of going on at the time. But we're finally here. We're finally done with the regular season. We only have just a few weeks until champs, which is obviously the biggest and best tournament of the year, and I'm very much looking forward to it. I appreciate everybody that stopped by. I'm sure Bink will can rattle off the names in the YouTube and Twitch chats, but thank you guys for supporting us and really just being the backbone of our podcast. It's been an incredible season in terms of the support that we've gotten from everybody. So very much appreciate it. And that does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yeah, like Preston said, thank you guys as always for all the support. Shout out Rickus Morty, who was in the Twitch chat today instead of the YouTube chat like usual, but shout out Rickus Morty, always stopping by. YouTube chat, shout out Jay Hearn, Chicken Chunks, Midnight, and Enjoy, and anybody else I might have missed. I hope I didn't miss anybody, but we had a bunch of people in both chats today, so really do appreciate all the support. Definitely does mean a lot. Had some really nice comments too. I think it was Midnight who said something that was really nice. He said this is a good production, and I told him that genuinely meant a lot to me, and I know it would mean a lot to you as well. So appreciate all you guys for stopping by and everything like that. Definitely does mean a lot. And yeah, Major Four is over, and now we got champs ahead, the big money events and everything like that. So if you're just stopping by for the first time or whatnot now, we got plenty more down the pipeline. So hope you'll follow or subscribe or whatever, and so you can stick around and join us on this journey as we're just here yapping about Call of Duty some more. So hope you guys enjoyed the weekend. I know I did, and I know we talked about it a lot. It was a good time, and champs is hopefully going to be just as exciting, and I'm looking forward to breaking all that down in the weeks ahead and everything like that. So enough yapping for now. Thank you guys as always. Definitely appreciate it, and we'll see you on the next one. Remember to send the chow.